Star Trek, Primitive Passenger, Season 4, Episode 3, Kelos'Var. The familiar shimmer of the transporter beam coalesced between Quark's bar and the security office on Deep Space Nine's bustling promenade. As the light faded, Nolan Mercer materialized, his face set in its usual mask of detached indifference. He took a moment to orient himself, dark eyes scanning the familiar surroundings. A commotion further down the promenade caught his attention. A crowd had gathered near the Bajoran temple, their excited voices creating a low, persistent hum. Nolan's brow furrowed as he made his way toward the throng, expertly weaving through the diverse mix of species that called the station home. As he drew closer, the crowd's excitement became palpable. Bajorans of all ages pressed forward, their faces alight with reverence and awe. At the center of the commotion, Nolan caught glimpses of ornate Bajoran robes and the glint of ceremonial objects. "What's all this about?" Nolan muttered to no one in particular, craning his neck for a better view. A nearby Bajoran woman, her eyes shining with unshed tears of joy, turned to him. "It's a miracle. One of the lost orbs has been returned to us." Nolan felt a chill run down his spine, an inexplicable sense of unease settling in his gut. He watched as a group of Vedeks carefully maneuvered an ornate, gilded container through the parting crowd. The box, which undoubtedly held the orb, seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy. As the procession passed by, Nolan found himself taking an involuntary step back. The hair on the back of his neck stood on end, and he couldn't shake the feeling that something was fundamentally wrong. The Bajoran's joy felt distant, alien to him, and he had to resist the urge to turn and walk away. Instead, he forced himself to remain still, watching as the orb was reverently carried into the temple. The doors closed behind the procession, but the crowd's excitement lingered, filling the air with an almost electric charge. Nolan shook his head, trying to dispel the creeping sense of dread that had settled over him. "It's just a box," he muttered to himself, but the words rang hollow even to his own ears. As he turned to leave, a hand grasped his arm. Nolan tensed, spinning to face the unexpected contact. He found himself looking into the eyes of an elderly Vedek whose weathered face was etched with an unsettling mix of joy and fervent intensity. "You," the Vedek breathed, his grip tightening on Nolan's arm. "You are the one from beyond the celestial temple. The one who will return the 4 orbs and begin the healing of Bajor." Nolan's blood ran cold. He jerked his arm free, stumbling back a step. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said, his voice harsher than he'd intended. "You got the wrong guy." But as Nolan turned to leave, the Vedek's voice rose above the crowd's murmur, his words sharp with fervor. "Kelos'Var," he cried, his aged hands reaching toward Nolan's retreating form. "He will fulfill the Kelos'Var." The name cut through the air like a knife, causing nearby Bajorans to turn and stare. Nolan quickened his pace, shouldering his way through the throng. The Vedek's voice followed him, growing more frantic with each repetition. "Kelos'Var, Kelos'Var." Heart pounding, Nolan didn't slow until he reached a small shop at the edge of the promenade. He leaned against the doorframe, drawing in a deep breath to steady himself. The cool metal against his back grounded him, a stark contrast to the surreal encounter he'd just fled. What in the hell was that all about? Nolan muttered, running a hand through his hair. "Kelos'Var?" A soft chuckle from within the shop caught his attention. A Bajoran woman stood behind the counter, her eyes twinkling with amusement and a hint of something deeper, reverence perhaps. "Not gibberish, I'm afraid," she said, setting aside the fabric she'd been folding. "The Prophecy of Kelos'Var is known to every Bajoran child." Nolan turned toward her, his curiosity piqued despite the lingering unease in his gut. "A prophecy?" The woman nodded, her earring catching the light as she moved. "Oh, yes. It's one of our oldest stories, passed down through generations." She paused, studying Nolan's face. "Though I must say, I've never seen anyone cause such a stir over it before." Nolan shifted uncomfortably under her gaze. "Look, I don't know what that Vedek thought he saw, but The prophecy speaks of a stranger, the woman interrupted, her voice taking on a rhythmic quality, as if reciting from memory. One who comes from beyond the celestial temple. It said this stranger will return 4 lost orbs to Bajor, beginning a great healing for our people. As she spoke, Nolan felt the hair on the back of his neck stand up again. A chill ran down his spine, and he had to resist the urge to flee once more. "It's just a story," he said, more to himself than to the woman. "A fairy tale." The Bajoran's eyes narrowed slightly. "Perhaps, but to many it's a promise of hope. A light in dark times." She tilted her head, regarding Nolan curiously. "Though I must admit you don't look much like a holy figure from prophecy." Nolan barked out a laugh, but it sounded hollow even to his own ears. "Trust me, I'm the last person who'd be fulfilling any prophecies, especially not one involving those. Orbs." He spat out the last word as if it left a bad taste in his mouth. The woman raised an eyebrow but said nothing more. Nolan straightened up, suddenly eager to be anywhere but here. "Thanks for the history lesson," he said, already backing away. "But I've got business to attend to." As he strode off down the promenade, Nolan couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted. The prophecy's words echoed in his mind, mixing with the Vedek's frantic cries. He quickened his pace, as if he could outrun the unsettling thoughts. The ancient Bajoran library was a stark contrast to the bustling promenade of Deep Space Nine. Dust motes danced in shafts of light that filtered through high windows, illuminating rows upon rows of data rods and old-fashioned books. The air was heavy with the scent of aged paper and the faint hum of preservation fields. Nolan Mercer stood at the entrance, his eyes adjusting to the dimmer light. He'd come here seeking answers, though a part of him wondered if he was better off not knowing. With a deep breath, he stepped further into the library. "Can I help you?" The voice, soft but firm, came from behind a stack of data pads. Nolan turned to see a middle-aged Bajoran man emerge from behind the pile. His graying hair was neatly combed back, and his eyes held the sharp intelligence of a seasoned scholar. "I'm looking for Jareth," Nolan said, his voice unconsciously lowering to match the hushed atmosphere of the library. The man's eyebrow raised slightly. "You found him. And you are?" "Nolan Mercer. I was hoping you could tell me about the Prophecy of Kelos'Var." Jareth's eyes widened almost imperceptibly. He glanced around the empty library before gesturing Nolan to follow him. "This way, please. We can speak more privately in my office." As they walked, Nolan couldn't help but notice the way Jareth's shoulders had tensed at the mention of the prophecy. The historian's reaction only deepened Nolan's unease. Jareth's office was a small, cluttered space filled with more books and artifacts. He cleared a chair for Nolan before settling behind his desk. "The Prophecy of Kelos'Var," Jareth began, his tone measured, "is one of our most ancient and controversial prophecies. May I ask why you're interested?" Nolan leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "Let's just say I had an interesting encounter with a Vedek earlier. He seemed to think I had something to do with this prophecy." Jareth's eyes narrowed. "This Vedek, was his name Telas by any chance?" Nolan shrugged. He didn't introduce himself. "Elderly man, very enthusiastic about the whole thing." Jareth sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. "That would be Telas. He's been somewhat fixated on the Kelos'Var prophecy since he joined the Order at 15. He's spent his entire life searching for signs of its fulfillment." "And how long ago was that?" Nolan asked. "Over 60 years now," Jareth replied, a note of sadness in his voice. "Many believe his obsession has clouded his judgment." Nolan felt a mix of relief and disappointment. "So you're saying he's not exactly a reliable source?" Jareth held up a hand. "I'm saying that Telas sees what he wants to see. But that doesn't necessarily mean the prophecy itself isn't valid." He stood, moving to a nearby shelf and retrieving an old, leather-bound book. "The vision of Kelos'Var speaks of a stranger from beyond the celestial temple," Jareth explained, carefully opening the book. "This stranger is destined to return 4 lost orbs to Bajor, ushering in an era of healing and renewal for our people." Nolan felt that familiar chill run down his spine. "And there's more to it, isn't there?" Jarath nodded solemnly. "There's a carving said to depict the prophet and the orbs. It's located in one of our most sacred sites." He turned the book toward Nolan, revealing an intricate sketch of the carving. Nolan leaned in, his breath catching in his throat. The figure in the carving, surrounded by 4 glowing orbs. "This is impossible," Nolan muttered, pushing away from the desk. "I'm not some prophesied savior. I'm just, well, more the opposite most of the time." Jareth closed the book gently. "Mr. Mercer, I'm a historian, not a religious leader. I can't tell you what to believe. But I can tell you that this prophecy has given hope to many Bajorans for centuries. Whether you're the fulfillment of that prophecy or not, that remains to be seen." As Nolan left the library, his mind reeled with the implications of what he'd learned. The prophecy, the carving, Telas's lifelong obsession. It all felt like too much. And yet, he couldn't shake the feeling that if kept heading down this path, he wasn't going to like where he ended up. Nolan wanted to see this carving for himself, to face whatever truth or madness awaited him there. The sacred Bajoran site was nestled in a secluded valley, its ancient stone structures a testament to centuries of faith and devotion. Nolan Mercer felt distinctly out of place as he approached, his practical attire a stark contrast to the ornate robes of the Bajoran religious leaders who had reluctantly granted him access. As Nolan neared the entrance to the sacred chamber, an elderly Vedek stepped forward, his eyes narrowed with suspicion. "I must ask again, why does an outsider seek to view our most holy relic?" Nolan met the Vedek's gaze steadily. "I'm here to understand, nothing more. The prophecy of Kelos'Var has been brought to my attention, and I need to see this carving for myself." The Vedek's frown deepened, but he stepped aside, allowing Nolan to pass. "Remember, this is a place of reverence. Treat it as such." Nolan nodded solemnly and entered the dimly lit chamber. As his eyes adjusted, he found himself face to face with the ancient carving. The massive stone relief dominated the far wall, its surface worn smooth by time yet still intricately detailed. At its center stood a bearded figure, draped in flowing robes, his expression one of serene wisdom. Around him, 4 glowing orbs pulsed with an otherworldly light, their surfaces etched with mysterious patterns. Nolan stepped closer, his eyes tracing the lines of the carving. The figure bore no resemblance to him, yet the way it held out a hand as if offering the orbs to the viewer, that sent a chill down his spine. Smaller spheres orbited the larger orbs, creating a sense of cosmic balance and movement within the static stone. The entire composition seemed to radiate an aura of ancient power and prophecy. As Nolan studied the carving, he found himself shaking his head. "This can't be about me," he muttered under his breath. "I'm nobody's savior." He reached out, his fingers hovering just above the surface of the stone. The carving seemed to pulse with an energy he couldn't explain, and he quickly withdrew his hand. "It calls to you, doesn't it?" The voice, trembling with age and excitement, came from directly behind him. Nolan spun around, coming face to face with Vedek Telas. The elderly Bajoran's eyes shone with an unsettling fervor, his gnarled hands reaching out toward Nolan. "You are the one," Telas breathed, his voice barely above a whisper. "The prophecy speaks true. You will bring the orbs home and heal Bajor." Nolan took a step back, his back pressing against the cool stone of the carving. He opened his mouth to protest, to deny the Vedek's claims, but found himself at a loss for words. As he stood there, caught between the rock of an ancient prophecy behind him and the hard place of a fervent believer before him, Nolan couldn't shake the feeling. This is all going to end badly. Nolan held up his hands, trying to stem the tide of Telas's fervent words. "Listen, I might be from beyond your celestial temple. I'm from very, very far away. But I'm not." The Vedek cut him off, his eyes blazing with conviction. "In the time of the emissary, it says. That's now, don't you see? Telas's voice quivered with excitement. "The prophecy speaks of the one from before the sorrows. That's you. You were here before the occupation, weren't you?" Nolan's brow furrowed. "I was, but how can someone be old enough to be from before the occupation, and yet still walk among us in the time of the emissary?" Telas pressed on, his words tumbling out in a rush. "Only you fit this description, Nolan Mercer." Nolan shook his head, frustration evident in his voice. "I am the worst possible savior Bajor could ever pick. Don't you get that?" But Telas was undeterred. He reached out, grasping Nolan's arm with surprising strength. "The prophecy defines you perfectly. There's a phrase that translates to something like the agonized or heart of pain. It says, 'The heart of pain will carry them.' Who else could that be but you, a man who has lived through centuries of suffering?" Tears fell from Telas's eyes in big heavy drops. "By the prophets, man, what you carry." Nolan fell silent, the weight of Telas's words settling uncomfortably on his shoulders. The Vedek's voice softened, taking on an almost pleading tone. "The one from beyond the celestial temple will return the orbs. It's all there, Nolan. You are the fulfillment of Kelos'Var's vision." For a long moment Nolan stood there, his gaze alternating between the ancient carving and Telas's earnest face. Finally he took a deep breath, choosing his words carefully. "Vedek Telas," he began, his voice low and measured, "I understand that this prophecy means a great deal to you and to many Bajorans, and I can see why some of it might seem to fit me." He paused, running a hand through his hair. "But I'm not a holy man. I'm not even a decent man. I've lived a long time, yes, but if I'm your savior, Bajor may have a long wait." Telas opened his mouth to protest, but Nolan held up a hand, silencing him gently. "I respect your faith, and the faith of your people," Nolan continued, "but I can't be what you want me to be. I'm not that guy." He stepped away from the carving, moving toward the chamber's exit. At the threshold, he turned back to Telas, who stood silent and still by the ancient stone. "I'm sorry if I've disappointed you," Nolan said softly, "but I think it's better to be honest now than to let you pin your hopes on something that won't happen." With that, Nolan left the sacred chamber, his mind whirling with thoughts of prophecies, time, and the weight of expectations he never asked to bear. The serene temple gardens, with their meticulously pruned trees and softly bubbling fountains, stood in stark contrast to the tension unfolding within them. Vedek Telas, his shoulders slumped and his eyes downcast, found himself surrounded by a group of stern-faced temple leaders. Ranjan Solbor, the most senior among them, stepped forward, his voice low but sharp with disapproval. "Vedek Telas, your behavior today was completely unacceptable. You've embarrassed the entire order with your theatrics." Telas opened his mouth to protest, but Solbor cut him off with a wave of his hand. "This obsession with the Kelos'Var prophecy has gone on long enough," another leader chimed in, her tone dripping with exasperation. "And now you're dragging outsiders into it? That man, nosing around the plat of Kelos'Var like some common tourist." Telas's eyes flashed with indignation. "But he's the one. I'm certain of it. If you'd just listen." "Enough," Solbor snapped. "We've indulged your fantasies for far too long, Telas. This ends now." A younger Ranjan, his face creased with worry, leaned in to whisper to Solbor, "Perhaps we should increase security around the sacred relics. Who knows what that outsider's true intentions might have been?" Solbor nodded gravely. "A wise precaution. See to it immediately." As the group turned to leave, Telas called out, his voice trembling, "Please, you must believe me. The prophecy is coming to pass. We must prepare." But his words fell on deaf ears. The temple leaders hurried away, their hushed voices carrying hints of scoffing laughter back to where Telas stood alone. "Poor old fool," one muttered, just loud enough for Telas to hear. "He'll be the death of us all if we're not careful." Left alone in the garden, Vedek Telas sank onto a nearby bench. His eyes, filled with a mixture of hurt and unwavering conviction, turned skyward. "Give me strength," he whispered to the prophets. Help me show them the truth before it's too late." As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the peaceful garden, Telas remained seated, lost in prayer and unshakable belief. The ancient stone walls of the Bajoran temple cast long shadows in the fading afternoon light, creating an atmosphere of somber reverence in a secluded corner of the sacred grounds. A group of religious leaders, their ornate robes rustling softly as they moved, had gathered for what they assumed would be yet another tedious meeting. Vedek Telas stood slightly apart from the others, his weathered face etched with a mixture of determination and sorrow. The air was thick with the scent of incense and the quiet murmur of prayer, creating a stark contrast to the tension that seemed to radiate from Telas. As the other leaders engaged in hushed conversations, occasionally casting wary glances in Telas's direction, it was clear that something momentous was about to unfold in this peaceful corner of the temple. Telas had silently reached a breaking point, his fervent belief in Nolan's divine purpose pushing him far beyond the realm of reason. To those around him it was clear he had lost his grip on reality, yet to Telas, his devotion had never been more certain. With a glint of faded fervor in his eyes and hands trembling with his last shreds of conviction, he took a step forward, as if to prove, once and for all, that his faith in Nolan was unwavering. There were murmurs among the others, sidelong glances exchanged, eyes rolling in disbelief. They saw a man unraveling, desperately clinging to a cause that existed more in his mind than in any tangible reality. But Telas was oblivious to their skepticism, or perhaps he simply didn't care anymore. For him, this was the moment that would validate everything. He had given up trying to convince them. His resolve had no need for their approval. Convinced that his death would somehow hasten the fulfillment of the prophecy, Telas gripped the canister with trembling hands. His eyes burned with an unshakable, almost fanatical determination as he raised it high above his head. With a swift, deliberate half-twist, he cracked the seal. The glowing fusion fuel plasma spilled forth, cascading over his entire body in shimmering streams. For a fleeting moment, his gaze locked with Ranjan Solbor's, a heartbeat of shared terror, or heartbeat of envy. Then, with a sudden roar, Telas erupted in a blazing inferno of purple and green flames. The unnatural blaze consumed him instantly, licking up toward the sky in a spectacle of eerie violet beauty. The group recoiled instinctively, the searing heat forcing them back. Faces twisted in horror and disbelief as the air filled with the sickly sweet scent of burning flesh and ozone. Telas was gone, reduced to little more than a fleeting vision of fire and smoke, his final act hanging heavily in the thick, scorched air. The classroom buzzed with the energy of young minds, eager to learn and share. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, illuminating the faces of Bajoran children as they sat attentively, their eyes fixed on the shimmering holographic display at the front of the room. The image rotated slowly, showing every intricate detail of the ancient carving from the Kelos'Var prophecy. The bearded figure stood tall, surrounded by the glowing orbs, his hand outstretched in an eternal gesture of offering. Lanara, a middle-aged Bajoran woman with kind eyes and a warm smile, stood beside the hologram. Her voice carried a mix of reverence and excitement as she addressed her students. "And so, children, the prophecy of Kelos'Var has been a cornerstone of our faith for generations. It speaks of hope, of renewal, and of Bajor's destined role in the grand tapestry of the universe." She paused, looking around the room. "Now, who among you has been fortunate enough to see the real carving in person?" Almost in unison, every small hand in the classroom shot up, accompanied by a chorus of excited, "Me, and I have." The children's faces beamed with pride, each eager to share their experience. Lanara's smile widened. "Wonderful. I'm so pleased to see that your parents understand the importance of connecting with our heritage. Meru, would you like to share your experience with the class?" A young girl with bright eyes stood up, her voice filled with awe. "It was amazing, Lanara. The carving felt alive somehow, like it was watching us back. The teacher nodded encouragingly. That's right, Maru. Many believe the carving itself is blessed by the prophets. Now, who can tell me what the prophecy of Kelos'Var predicts? Another child, a boy named Jaro, raised his hand. It says someone from beyond the celestial temple will bring back the lost orbs and heal Bajor. Excellent, Jaro, Kailanara praised. The prophecy gives us hope for a brighter future. It reminds us that even in our darkest hours, the prophets have a plan for Bajor. As the lesson continued, the children's enthusiasm never wavered. Their questions and comments revealed not just knowledge, but a deep personal connection to the prophecy. It was clear that for these young Bajorans, the prophecy of Kelos'Var was more than just a story. It was a living, breathing part of their cultural identity. The scene in the classroom served as a poignant reminder of how deeply ingrained the prophecy was in Bajoran society, passed down through generations and shaping the hopes and dreams of an entire people. Nolan was lost in thought, staring out a viewport on the promenade when Kira's voice cut through his reverie. Mercer. Her tone was curt, professional. He turned, eyebrow raised. Major, to what do I owe the pleasure? Kira's face was a mask of neutrality, but there was a hint of tension around her eyes. I thought I should be the one to tell you. Vedek Telas is dead. Nolan's expression hardened. Dead? How? He immolated himself. In the temple. Kira's voice remained steady, but her eyes searched Nolan's face for a reaction. Nolan's jaw clenched. Because of me. Because of that damn prophecy. Kira nodded once, her posture rigid. It seems that way. Prophets, Nolan growled. It's always the same. People dying over nothing. Running a hand through his hair. I obviously don't have any hidden orbs, Kira. To die over just that one thing. You know how faith can be, Mercer, Kira replied, a hint of defensiveness in her tone. Sometimes it's all people have. Nolan shook his head, frustration evident in his voice. It's senseless. It's pile. Waste. Maybe, Kira conceded, but it wasn't your fault. Telas made his choice. They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of the situation hanging between them. Finally, Nolan spoke. Thanks for telling me, Major. I appreciate it. Kira nodded curtly. You should know. There might be questions about your involvement. There always are, Nolan replied with a grim smile. I'll deal with it. As Kira turned to leave, Nolan called after her. Major, make sure he gets a proper burial, will you? Whatever that means for your people. Whatever it takes. Nolan tilting his head, well aware that large religions run on donations. Kira paused, then nodded once more before walking away, leaving Nolan alone with his thoughts and the endless expanse of stars beyond the viewport. Epilogue. The soft glow of candlelight flickered through the ornate windows of the Bajoran temple, casting long shadows across the promenade. A small group of mourners filed quietly into the sacred space, their faces solemn and drawn. The air was heavy with incense and the weight of loss. Nolan Mercer stood a respectful distance away, his back against a bulkhead, observing the proceedings with a mix of curiosity and unease. He was dressed simply but formally, a concession to the gravity of the occasion. His face betrayed little emotion, but his eyes never left the temple entrance. As the last of the mourners entered, Major Kira approached, her steps measured and deliberate. She paused beside Nolan, following his gaze to the temple door. Are you going to go in? She asked, her voice low and neutral. Nolan shook his head slightly, his eyes still fixed on the entrance. No, Major, it's not for me. Kira studied him for a moment, as if weighing his response. Then, with a small nod of understanding, she turned and walked toward the temple, disappearing inside to join the others. Left alone, Nolan's stoic expression softened slightly. He closed his eyes briefly, listening to the muffled sounds of Bajoran chants drifting from within. The melody was alien to him, yet haunting in its beauty. As he opened his eyes, his gaze drifted upward, beyond the temple and out toward the stars visible through the station's viewports. With a deep breath, Nolan pushed himself off the bulkhead, He cast one last glance at the temple before turning and walking away, his footsteps echoing softly in the near-empty promenade. As he moved further from the memorial service, Nolan's pace quickened slightly, as if eager to put distance between himself and the weight of Bajoran expectations. Yet even as he walked, a part of him knew that this was far from over. The prophecy, like the memory of Vedek Telas, would linger, a constant reminder of the complex tapestry of fate in which he found himself inexorably woven. Late that night, in the dark of Nolan's quarters on Empire North, Nolan lay drenched in sweat, battling a fitful sleep. In the sweltering Oklahoma heat, a group of children are gathered around something on the ground. As he approached, he realized with a start that the figure on the ground was himself as a child. The dusty playground shimmered and warped, reality bending like a mirage in the Oklahoma heat. Suddenly, Nolan was no longer an observer, but the subject of the scene, his adult consciousness trapped in the body of his childhood self. The gritty earth pressed against his back, the sun's merciless rays beating down on his face. Around him, a circle of children materialized, their features eerily familiar yet undeniably alien. They loomed over him, their shadows offering no respite from the blistering heat. Laughter erupted from their ranks, high-pitched and mocking. "Look at him," one child squealed, pointing a finger that seemed to elongate unnaturally. "He thinks he can fix it." He sat up with a gasp,